The hidden architecture of family conflict. Why some relationships never heal. When we talk about family conflict, our first instinct is often judgment. This is strange. That person is difficult. They have a flawed character. Yet psychology asks a different question. Where did this behavior come from? And philosophy asks an even deeper question. To what extent is one person responsible for carrying the emotions of others? Today, this is not a story about labeling a daughter-in-law as difficult or a mother-in-law as unreasonable. Instead, we are examining a recurring pattern, a structural dynamic that drives conflict to escalate, often with the same destructive choreography through the lens of family systems. Consider this familiar yet baffling scenario. Why do some daughters-in-law deliberately provoke a clash between their mother and mother-in-law? At first glance, our reaction is moralistic. They have bad character. They lack common sense. How could adults act this way? Yet the real question is not about blame. It is about structure. Why do some people, when faced with conflict, feel compelled to involve a third party? Why do they bypass direct dialogue, compromise, or negotiation, and instead spiral into triangulated confrontations or emotional withdrawal? This is not a personality flaw. It is a structural strategy rooted in emotional immaturity, learned patterns, and unprocessed familial dynamics. Psychologically, we can see three interconnected mechanisms at work. First, triangulation. Conflict is transferred through a third party. The daughter-in-law offloads her anxiety, anger, and discomfort onto her own mother, who then confronts the mother-in-law on her behalf. This is a classic pattern when emotional self-regulation has not yet developed. Second, dependent aggression. She maintains a victim position while using her mother as a proxy aggressor. This simultaneously evades personal responsibility and satisfies the need to assert control. Third, boundary diffusion. Her sense of self is enmeshed with her mother's emotions. The daughter cannot distinguish between her own experiences, her mother's grievances, and her in-laws' behaviors. Conversations with her mother bypass reflection and negotiation, flowing immediately as conduits for emotional escalation. Philosophically, this raises profound questions about the limits of responsibility and the ethics of emotional interdependence. How much should we bear the feelings of others? Where should boundaries exist between self and other in relational spaces? To understand this dynamic, we must consider the mother-daughter relationship in its developmental context. In many cases, the daughter grew up in a home where emotional independence was never modeled. The mother's conflicts were projected onto the child. Direct conflict resolution, negotiation, and problem solving were absent. The daughter learned that loyalty meant enmeshment, supporting the mother's emotional battles at all costs. From this environment, three behavioral roles emerge. Allie, the daughter, becomes her mother's confidant and strategic partner. Emotional repository. She absorbs and manages her mother's unresolved anger and frustration. Proxy fighter. She executes battles the mother cannot confront directly. This structure is self-reinforcing. It provides the daughter with a sense of purpose and protection, validation through maternal approval, emotional belonging. Yet attempting to break free feels like betrayal. Disengagement triggers anxiety. I am abandoning my mother. I am alone. Thus, the system perpetuates itself. External conflicts are manufactured to maintain internal security. The implications are profound. Without understanding these underlying structures, spouses, in-laws, and bystanders are trapped in cycles of exhaustion and repeated conflict. But once we map the architecture, the enmeshment, triangulation, and boundary failures, we gain clarity. We see why conversations fail, why patterns repeat, and why conflict seems inevitable. In short, this is not about blame. It is about understanding the invisible frameworks that shape human behavior. By recognizing these patterns, we can approach family conflict with insight rather than judgment, and perhaps begin to untangle the structures that trap us in repetition. If you find this perspective helpful, please subscribe, like, and share this video to help others understand the invisible structures that govern relationship. Many of us believe that resolving conflicts is instinctive. We assume that adults automatically know how to negotiate, compromise, or simply speak directly when tensions arise. But what happens when a person grows up in an environment where none of these skills were ever modeled? Today, let's examine one of the most striking patterns we see in daughters-in-law who cut ties with their in-laws, an extreme survival strategy that often repeats across generations. The fourth key reason for the breakdown of mature separation between mother and daughter is deceptively simple. These women never saw conflict resolved in a healthy way. This isn't about flawed character. It's not about moral failure or temperament. It's about learned behavior, or more precisely, a lack of relational education. Conflict resolution is not instinct. It is learned through observation and experience. Children don't learn to negotiate or mediate from lectures they learn by watching. In a functional household, a child might see this: a mother is upset, and she speaks directly to the father. Voices might rise, but the issue is addressed face to face. The child absorbs. If I have a problem, I speak to the person involved. This scene becomes the template for all future conflict. In contrast, in households where boundaries are blurred, the mother might vent to the daughter rather than addressing the father directly. Your dad won't listen. It's useless to try. The child learns a different lesson. Direct communication is dangerous. Silence is safer. From this foundation, a daughter may grow up avoiding confrontation altogether. The patterns deepen. Emotions are never calibrated. In healthy families, conflicts are followed by acknowledgement. We were upset. I understand your feelings. Children internalize. Feelings can be managed and harmonized. In boundary-blurred families, anger either explodes or simmers silently. A child learns to absorb the adult's unprocessed emotion, forming the belief feelings are to be endured or dumped on someone else, not reconciled. Mediation and compromise are absent too. Where typical households show negotiation and gradual resolution, boundary-blurred households resort to extremes: avoidance, emotional outbursts, or severing ties. Children internalize. Relationships are win, lose, or cut off. Later, in marriage, compromise is no longer a conceivable option. Instead, three destructive substitutes take hold. 1. Triangulation, involving a third party to handle disputes. A daughter calls her mother rather than speaking to her mother-in-law or spouse. Conflict shifts from the original parties to new targets, escalating tensions. 2. Gossip and blame conversations framed as consolation actually reinforce division. That's just how they are. It's not your fault. Children internalize. Others are objects of judgment, not understanding. 3. Team formation conflict becomes about alliances. Who is on my side? This reinforces an us versus them mentality. As a result, skills such as initiating difficult conversations, regulating emotions in real time, or finding a compromise rarely develop. What does grow is a capacity to transfer conflict, claim victimhood, and decisively sever ties. In adulthood, extreme separation becomes the default conflict strategy. Here's the critical insight. This behavior is not deliberate malice. It is a learned survival strategy embedded in unseparated mother-daughter dynamics, shaped by the family environment. Attempts to reason with the daughter, act like an adult, communicate directly are often perceived as attacks and only deepen the estrangement. The practical takeaway is this: the solution is not persuasion, judgment, or moralizing. It is clear boundary setting and disruption of triangulation. Understanding this framework prevents futile cycles of blame and exhaustion. Many ask, why does a son align with his mother when the daughter-in-law cuts ties? Why do attempts at mediation backfire? The answer lies not in personality, loyalty, or virtue, but in the bardo of consciousness, as described in Tibetan philosophy, a liminal state, where survival strategies dominate perception. In this state, cutting off relations is not cruelty. It is perceived as necessary for psychological survival, and the spouse becomes involuntarily entwined in this survival loop. Recognizing these patterns is liberating. It reframes recurring family conflicts, not as personal failure, but as predictable outcomes of learned relational behaviors. Once you understand this, the unnecessary guilt, frustration, and energy drain start to dissolve. This channel does not aim to label anyone as bad. Instead, it exposes the invisible structures that corrode relationships. If this analysis helps you establish your own boundaries or navigate difficult family dynamics, consider subscribing, liking, and sharing so that others facing similar challenges can benefit. In the next episode, we will explore specific lines that in-laws and spouses must not cross, and situations where intervention actually worsens conflict. Thank you for watching. Understanding these dynamics is the first step toward real relief and toward separating survival strategy from morality.